I was watching the Celtics Bucks game last night, and the Celtics ended up prevailing in that game. But just watching that game, I know as weird as it sounds, I wasn't really that entertained by this game, even though it was competitive, simply because the Celtics are like a boring, generic team, but they fit this era, as weird as it sounds. They're a team that shoots a lot of threes. I think they might be number one in 3-point shooting in the league when it comes to attempts. They rely heavily on the 3-point shot. They play that boring, generic style of basketball that is prevalent throughout the league. But they're probably the best at doing it today now, just moving the ball around until someone's open for a three or moving it around until someone's open for a layup or a dunk. It's very hard to defend because they always have 4 or 5 guys that can hit a three on the court. So they always end up just chucking a bunch of threes or getting a dunk or a layup. It's just very, very boring. And just is I would say just symbolic about how much the league is not fun anymore like it used to be, simply because that's the dominant style and they own it. It used to be the Warriors that really owned that style of play, but now it's the Celtics, but they're just a very boring, generic team. Just that's the way I look at it. Granted, when Porzingis plays, it's a little bit more exciting to see his shot blocking and his dunks and all of this stuff. But overall, I find the Celtics boring. But when I was watching that game, I didn't find them hateable. It's not like they had any player that really got underneath my skin that I was just like, damn, I really hate the Celtics. I hate this guy. I just want to see him, burn. I can't stand him. Just there's none of that. Granted, I feel Jalen Brown is starting to get a bigger head now after winning that title. You could see it with his taunts, how he does that like every game now, his taunting. But even that doesn't I don't find it offensive. I just find it amusing and silly when I see him taunting guys because it's just funny. I'm just like, all right, Jalen, whatever, you can have your fun. But I don't find it like offensive where I'm just like, damn, I can't stand that guy. I just like to knock him out. But it's like they don't have that hateable vibe. They're just generically boring when I watch them play. That's the way I view it. I know a lot of people hate Jason Tatum because he's like this overrated superstar that always gets bailed out by his team when he's choking. I understand that story, but Tatum is not really like a hateable villain where you're just angry the moment he's on the screen or he's giving an interview. Just he doesn't have that persona. Just he's not a villain. And it got me thinking after the game, like, is there really a hateable team right now that's a title contender in this current NBA? It seems like in every era, at least in my lifetime, that there was a hateable contender, or in some cases hateable champions. I just remember, obviously, when I was growing up during the 90s, I didn't find the Bulls hateable to me, even though I was a Spurs fan. I guess you could say that's the reason why the Spurs never went to the finals during the Bulls runs, but I never found the Bulls hateable outside of Dennis Rodman. Just he was the only guy hateable in those teams, but the team as a whole, they weren't hateable. Granted, if you lived in New York during that time period, you probably really despised them, or if you lived in Salt Lake, you really hated them. But outside of those places, I don't think nationally the Bulls just weren't a hateable team. They were actually loved all across the country. Hence why the NBA had the highest ratings during that time period. But I would say there was hateable title contenders back then. I remember just the Knicks. I think everybody hated the New York Knicks. Outside of New York, no one loved them from what I can recall during that era. They were like the villain team during the 90s. You would always root for their failure. They were always contenders, just always on the verge, but the Bulls were in their way. And then whenever they could get through to the finals and Jordan wasn't there, they lost to the Rockets and the Spurs. But they were a very hateable team. Just they were dirty, they were nasty, just they were straight up bullies. Just they were not likable. I remember them very well. So you had that during the 90s at least, even though the Bulls were likable champions, I would say. And the Rockets and Spurs, I know people are going to say I'm biased, but I never thought any of those teams were hateable when they were champions. And then fast forward to the 2000s, I would say the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe and Shaq were really the first NBA championship team I hated. And by the time they were winning titles, I had just become like a young adult. So I really despised them. I remember just their first title they won was like back when I was a junior in high school. Just a hateable bunch. I never liked Kobe, his smugness, his arrogance, and Shaq. I never liked him either. I felt Shaq was low key dirty with his elbows, just running over guys. just all the dirty stuff he would get away with the refs allowing him to get away offensive fouls, and the shit he talked about the Spurs. So you can say I was biased that I hated them because they were a rival of the Spurs. How Shaq called the Spurs fake champions and saying that they were WNBA champs when they won that title in '99. And then you had Phil Jackson, who would rub more salt in the wound, and by saying that the Spurs only won because it wasn't a full season. So to me, they were very hateable. But I could argue, not only just as a Spurs fan, that they were just hateable, but the rest of the country, I would say, really despised them outside of Shaq and Kobe fans, just Laker fans. They had an equal amount of people that hated them, because I remember I would talk to random people about sports, just people who were NBA fans who weren't even, Spurs fans, but they hated the Lakers. They were just like, fuck these guys. I hate them. I'm rooting for anybody but these guys to win this year. That's how I was back then. They generated a lot of hate. That's what I remember very well. I know that because I was a young adult during that era. They were just despicable. I despised the hell out of them. Just couldn't stand them, found them obnoxious. And then obviously during the O's, then you had the Spurs. I don't believe that they were hateable. Granted, I'm a Spurs fan, but I never really heard people saying the Spurs were hateable. Maybe just a rival, just like Suns fans, possibly they hated them. But really overall, most people didn't hate the Spurs. If anything, they didn't care about them from what I remember very well. So they weren't hateable champions at all. And then you had some teams that were blip champions like the Detroit Pistons, Miami Heat. They weren't hateable. Just they didn't have the ingredients to really be hateable. So really during the 2000s, I felt it was just mainly the Lakers that were very hateable. They were very polarizing. And then the Kobe Gasol Lakers, just again, hateable because of Kobe. Kobe was a very polarizing figure. You either loved him or you hated him. I felt there was really no middle ground for him back then. And then you fast forward to the 2010s, and then you got LeBron in Miami, and a lot of people hate him. Obviously, LeBron's very polarizing too. So that's when he became hateable after the decision. Granted, I didn't care about the decision. I actually was fine with going to Miami at the time, because I was thinking honestly myself, like, hey, I would leave that shithole Cleveland if I could leave it too. But a lot of people despised LeBron during that time period. For me, I actually didn't start disliking LeBron until the mid 2010s. And it had to do with him saying he was the GOAT and proclaiming he was the GOAT. Just to me, I thought that was a bunch of nonsense. That back then I didn't feel he had done enough to be called the GOAT. And even now, I don't think he's the GOAT, but that's another story. But I felt that's when LeBron became a polarizing figure for me, mid 2010s. But at the start of 2010s, he was pretty much a polarizing figure for the rest of the country. So you had that going on. And then the Warriors, again, like I felt the Warriors were a hateable bunch. I hated Draymond. Just he's a villain, just rotten, just scummy. And then Stephen Curry was annoying. To me, I felt they were like a tag team. Stephen Curry's celebrations, hated to seeing his gestures, all that. I always felt Steph Curry was fake in that regard, because he wasn't that type of guy that celebrated like that when he was in college. I saw that because I live in North Carolina, so I saw some of his games. But anyways, they were hateable. I didn't like their style. Couldn't stand them. Thought they were whiny. And plus, I thought Draymond got away with a lot of shit. He magnified the hatred for them. But it's like they were polarizing too, because I remember LeBron fans hated them. So they were against them. And then, that was pretty much LeBron fans against them. And then with the Cavs, it was like everyone hated LeBron. So it was kind of like this weird civil war with basketball fans during that stretch when the Cavs and Warriors were playing each other, that you were rooting for the other mainly because you hated the opposition. It was kind of like a bad election. That's what I felt. That's what I felt those Warrior versus Cavs matches were. Personally, I hated both, so I just sat out of those rivalries with having to root for anybody. I hated both teams. So I remember that. They were pretty hateable. And then you had LeBron with the Lakers, again, polarizing figure. So a lot of people despised him, and he hasn't done shit since 2020. So they haven't been a contender really since then. And right now, when you look at the current NBA, I don't really see a hateable contender. I'm just looking around. I was talking to my brother last night about this, and he was saying the Suns are very hateable. I thought about it. Yeah, I would say Kevin Durant is very obnoxious. There's just something about looking at this ugly cricket face guy that he's annoying. He has some weird bipolar disorder, and you hear him talk. He tries to be a badass by being rude in interviews, but he can't really pull it off. So you can see this kind of fake. he's just a weird guy. So yeah, he's not likable, I would say, when you hear some of his interviews. And Booker can be obnoxious. Just so I guess you could say that the Suns are hateable, but I don't see them as contenders. I just don't see it. And then I'm just trying to look at who else. And my brother was telling me the Mavericks, that they're hateable because Luka, Kyrie, and Clay are all whiny, annoying guys. And I was thinking about that. He could have a point. Luka is annoying the way he cries to the refs. Kyrie, it can be annoying and polarizing. And then you factor in Clay, who is obnoxious, the pothead thing going on. And I was thinking, yeah, the Mavericks could be that team. They could be hateable in that way. Just that, yeah, I could see it possibly, but I'm still not sold on them being a contender. Granted, they're right now in the top three, so we'll see. But yeah, they're a possibility. I look at them, but then when I look at the West, I think the team that could really be a hateable villain that could be a contender is the Grizzlies. They have the ingredients. Ja Morant is just not a likable guy, just with his antics. You see what he's doing. I think him being the face of that team, his celebrations, the stuff he does, just I could possibly see it with him and the Grizzlies. They could be that team. They have potential to be a very hateable bunch. And then when I look at the East, I really don't see a hateable team in the East. Cavs are number one, but they don't strike me as hateable. Just can't really see anything that's really hateable about them. Donovan is an okay guy. Just Mobley is a quiet guy. I look at just Garland, doesn't strike me as a hateable guy, and then just Allen, I don't see him as a hateable person. So it's like they don't have that energy. They don't have that energy. I look at them, the Knicks. I don't think the Knicks are really hateable when I look at them. It's like Jalen Brunson, he's a likable player. I'm looking at their team. Maybe Josh Hart has potential to be annoying. He does seem annoying. But overall, yeah, I don't know if I don't see them as a villain team. And I just look at the rest of the East. It just doesn't look promising. So it's interesting that we're in an era where there's not really a hateable contender. Maybe the Grizzlies. I think they're like the best candidate for that. But that's all I have to say. And I know some people argue the Lakers, but the Lakers are hateable because they're Lakers and they have LeBron, but they're not a contender. I don't see them as a contender. I think for them to be a contender with LeBron, they would have to make some miraculous trade to get someone like a Jokic or a Giannis, and I just don't see that happening. But that's just my take on this.